A Healer's Gift. Adventures of Broad. Book 1. Adventures on Broad. Written by Tao Wong. Narrated by Eric Martin. Chapter 7. The following days for Daniel fall into the same pattern as the day before. An early breakfast in the top, followed by training with Litzburn at the hall. In the late afternoon, Daniel spars with Mary before retiring for dinner with her and a lecture about the basics of adventuring. The moment dinner is over, he is escorted by a grateful Pearson to the clinic, where he works alongside the minimal staff, using his healing skills, spells, and, on occasion, his gift to reduce the waiting line. The line at the clinic never seems to reduce, no matter how much he does. But the work itself is rewarding. Each day is packed, every morning a struggle, as Litzburn berates him for forgetting part of what he learned the day before, driving the willing adventurer ever harder. On the 4th day of training, he finally manages to make Mary move from her spot, the casual blocks insufficient. On the 6th, after chaining together a series of strikes, he makes her move regularly and pick up speed. On the 7th day, he finally breaks through. Level up. Adventurer Level 2. You have gained 5 attribute points and 1 skill proficiency. The level up notification is dismissed, leaving Daniel on the floor, rubbing his jaw. The level up had caught him unawares, distracting him for a crucial moment, leading to the blow that he forgets to block properly. Still, he can't help smiling. Sure, the first level was always easier to gain after any class change, but in a week... Mary stands over Daniel, offering him a hand up and a murmur of, "Congratulations." "Thank you. You and Litzburn, this will help a lot," Daniel says as he lets himself get pulled up. "It's your hard work," Mary smiles, clapping him on the back. "We're done for today. You might be rather useless in the mornings from what Litzburn says, but you work hard. You should spend the evening deciding where to put your points. I have dinner with Elise and Charles tonight, as I leave tomorrow." Daniel nods, a bit impatient to review his status screen. It's been such a busy week, he hasn't had time to review it, but he can certainly see the wisdom of her words. After all, he's going into the dungeon tomorrow for the first time. "Thank you again." "Daniel, your gift. Don't take it for granted. Most others have to start out slow, buying potions from the apothecary for healing, and if they run out or are too gravely injured, leave the dungeon till they are healed. You don't have to. It's also a double-edged sword, as you come to rely on it too much. Just don't push yourself too hard. That includes the clinic," Mary says. She hasn't asked what his gift costs him as yet, but it was common knowledge that there must be a cost of some form. Still, his performance in the morning had given her an inkling, but it was his secret to keep. As they talk, Mary leads him to the corner, where she hands over her training sword to be put away once again. The clerk returns after seeing her training sword in its special spot in the armory, with a real mace, which she takes from him with a nod. Mary then turns to Daniel, offering him the mace. "This is the last thing I can do for you now, Daniel. The rest will be up to you." Daniel takes it and murmurs his gratitude, hefting the mace and looking it over. Steel mace. Damage, 3 - 7 plus 0.5 strength plus 2 quality bonus. Durability, 50 out of 50. Item class, common. Quality, good, plus 2 bonus to damage. Daniel can't help but marvel at the weapon, the nicest he has ever owned, before eventually slipping the mace through a loop in his belt. "I talked to Kyra last night. I'll visit once in a while, but I won't be there every day anymore. As much as I like helping, I can't. She understands. Mary, all this, the training, the mace, the advice, how can I ever thank you?" "You don't. I'm leaving tomorrow for Starhaven. My team's waiting for me, and I need to get back. If you are ever in Starhaven, buy me a drink as thanks if you must. Just don't come too fast." Mary smiles slightly at that, clapping him on the shoulder once more before turning to leave. Daniel understands her message. Starhaven only has expert-level dungeons, and was no place for a novice adventurer like him. Not yet, at least. That evening, after a rushed dinner by himself, Daniel lies in bed and debates what to do with his new attribute points and skill proficiencies. 5 attribute points and 1 skill proficiency to allocate. Unlike his previous class as a miner, the adventurer class was much more open-ended on its attribute point allocation. Strength, agility, and constitution were all key to his needs as a melee fighter, but it was his intelligence and willpower that dictated his ability to heal. He frowns for a moment, deciding to put a couple of extra points into agility, and a point each into constitution, intelligence, and wisdom. He was more than strong enough for now. That done, he calls up his skill proficiency tree and stares at the new options available for him. All that training had increased his skills in both shield, dodge, combat sense, and club, offering him more options than he knew what to do with. As he gains ability in each skill, new skill proficiencies would become available that allowed him to enhance the basic abilities of each skill. This even translated to his healing skill, with both mundane options like first aid, or at higher levels, powerful healing spells. Unsure of what to do, Daniel decides to peruse his proficiencies again, musing over his options. An upgrade to his minor healing spell would reduce the mana cost and increase the amount healed slightly. It was a good option for both the clinic and the dungeon. However, he had the backup of his own gift, which should be enough for now, so he dismisses that option. In terms of defense, he could learn Hard Block, offering him a chance to beat aside an opponent's weapon and potentially riposte on the line of attack. A truly successful Hard Block could even damage or disarm an opponent. On the other hand, tumbling under dodge would provide a more efficient means of getting out of the way of large attacks or groups, though Sway was a passive skill proficiency that would offer him the chance to dodge blows by inches without giving ground. Daniel knew Mary favored that option, allowing her to hold her ground even against the strongest opponents. Sway was a skill particularly useful for the smaller, lighter adventurer, but after consideration, Daniel discards it. It just doesn't suit his fighting style, especially as he intends to specialize in the use of a shield when he could afford one. Dueling from combat sense would give him a bonus to hit and his critical hit skill while fighting a single opponent, but as he was a solo adventurer, multiple mobs were a guarantee at some point. While Daniel had no shield or armor to his name at this time, he had more hit points than most beginning adventurers since he had started out his career later than most of them. Trusting in his ability to take damage, Daniel dismisses all but his combat skill proficiencies to review. Shield Bash, an attack with your shield, turning it into an offensive weapon as well as a defensive tool. Skill, active. Cost, 12 stamina. Effect, user's bash does 1 to 2 points of damage, plus 0.5 per level of the shield skill. Has a 1% chance per level of shield skill chance to stun for 5 seconds. Power Strike, powerful single strike that causes additional damage to an opponent. Skill, active. Cost, 15 stamina. Effect, user's Power Strike does 50% more damage, plus 2% per level of club skill. Double Strike. Cross Strike allows the wielder to launch a chained attack, striking twice in the time it would take an inexperienced attacker to attack once. Each strike, if it lands, is at 70% of the damage. Skill, active. Cost, 25 stamina. Effect, user strikes twice in quick succession. Each strike does 70% of normal damage. Damage increases 0.5% per club skill level of user. Power Strike was a very common attack for most melee fighters. It provided a high level of damage and could crush many lower-level enemies if he could increase his skill level with clubs sufficiently. Shield Bash was probably the next most common attack form. A safe skill that made both hands dangerous, and that was favored by shield users like himself. The stun effect could be very useful in a fight, but unfortunately he didn't own a shield at this time. Still, as Daniel thinks about the various sparring sessions he's had with Mary, Daniel can only choose double strike. It was only with a flurry of blows did he ever make her move, make her take him semi-seriously. Satisfied, he selects the skill proficiency and stares at his newly updated status screen. Name: Daniel Chai. Class: Level 2 Adventurer, 0%. Subclasses: Level 7, Minor, 19%. Human, Male. Statistics: Life, 176. Stamina, 176. Mana, 136. Critical hit chance, 4%. Attributes: Strength, 17. Agility, 14. Constitution, 24. Intelligence, 15. Willpower, 17. Luck, 13. Skills: Unarmed Combat, Level 2, 47 out of 100. Clubs, Level 7, 21 out of 100. Shield, Level 5, 18 out of 100. Dodge, Level 3, 16 out of 100. Combat Sense, Level 2, 12 out of 100. Perception, Level 3, 21 out of 100. Mining, Level 7, 78 out of 100. Healing, Level 7, 7 out of 100. Herb Lore, Level 3, 31 out of 100. Cooking, Level 2, 37 out of 100. Singing, Level 2, 14 out of 100. Skill proficiencies: Double Strike, Mapping, 2. Spells: Minor Healing, 1. Gifts: Martyr's Touch. The caster may heal oneself or others by touch and concentration, sacrificing a portion of his life to do so. Cost varies, depending on the extent of the injuries healed. Chapter 8. Listen up, children. The guard in front of the dungeon entrance stares at the group of adventurers before him. The beginner adventurers grouped around him vary in size and clothing, though most are in their mid to early teens and sport a single weapon, most often a short sword. The adventurers are mostly human, though on occasion Daniel spots a beastkin and even one dwarf in the group. This is your first time in, so I strongly recommend you stick to the first floor. If you do manage to find the stairway to the second floor, you may go down, but only to access the transportation gem. That'll allow you to travel to the second floor directly when you are ready to take it on. The number one cause of adventurer deaths is overconfidence, so don't think about going down to the second floor until you cleared the entire first floor. Never start a new floor injured. It's the fastest way to get yourself killed. Remember, the guild buys mana stones of all sizes, so make sure to collect every single drop that you get. The blacksmiths have asked me to remind all of you not to bring kobold shanks back. They don't want them or need them. Any questions? Barely waiting for the adventurers' answers, the guard steps aside and waves them into the dungeon. Gripping his mace in hand, Daniel nods his thanks one last time before stepping in, hand slightly clammy on the grip of his mace. On entrance, Daniel is immediately greeted by a simple stone room lit by the sunlight behind and the soft white glow characteristic of the dungeon's mana-imbued walls. Grinning slightly, Daniel shifts his bag once more to ensure it is properly seated before following the sole corridor that leads into the dungeon proper. The exit immediately splits into 3 earthen passageways, and Daniel pauses, listening for the movements of the other adventurers before choosing the middle pathway. As he moves deeper, a mental mini-map of the dungeon begins to form in his mind from the mapping proficiency. Daniel had gained that option as a minor, like most others, and chose to level it up a couple of times rather than other more traditional mining proficiencies, as he knew it'd be more useful for him in the future. You never wanted to be lost in the dark. I wonder what other adventurers do. Spending time thinking about inconsequential things like that is never a good idea in a dungeon, a fact that Daniel finds out to his chagrin when he turns a corner and walks into a kobold. A runt even among its kind, the 3-foot-tall creature looks like a gray, gangly, slightly malnourished child clad in peasant garb, other than its rather elongated ears and 2 wide eyes. Somehow, even after Mary's description, the kobold looks nothing like he had pictured it to be. The kobold reacts first, thrusting his only weapon, a shank made of metal and bone, into Daniel's chest. It hits hard, plunging through cloth and skin and grating against a rib. Daniel jumps backwards, groaning in pain, as he feels blood begin to dribble from the wound, waving his mace to ward off the kobold. Taking to the offense, Daniel lashes out once, and then again, the kobold scurrying backwards and staying out of range of his attacks. As Daniel recovers from his swings, the kobold darts in again and attempts a stab, and only a last-minute hasty parry by Daniel forces the kobold to stop his own attack or have his arm crushed. Daniel again steps forwards, attempting to strike the kobold, who dances back and swings at Daniel's arm, nicking him. This fight is completely different from his earlier sparring matches with Mary. The kobold is smaller and more prone to feints, and is focused on short, quick strikes to Daniel, rather than a single painful attack. As blood continues to squeeze out from his open wound, Daniel pushes forward to finish the fight. He throws another overhand right, and then, as the kobold ducks, charges forwards and activates double strike, his mace swinging faster as the proficiency activates. The first attack from the left is blocked, but using the force of the block, Daniel swings the mace around to strike on the kobold's unprotected right side. The mace crunches into the kobold's shoulder, cracking bone and mashing muscle. Panicking, the kobold pulls itself away from Daniel and attempts to stab his attacker again with its shank. This time Daniel is ready, though, and smashes his mace onto the kobold's outstretched attacking hand, crushing fingers and forcing the monster to drop its weapon. As the kobold recovers, Daniel swings again, delivering a critical strike on the top of the kobold's head to deliver a fatal blow. A moment later, the body dissolves into acrid smoke, leaving behind a small mana crystal. Daniel barely pays attention, slumping into the corner and holding a hand over his wound as he chain casts minor healing on himself. It's only when the bleeding stops that he pays attention to the notifications he received during the battle. Critical hit, 29 damage dealt, kobold killed. Minor healing cast on Daniel, 14 hit points restored. Minor healing cast on Daniel, 10 hit points restored. Bleeding has stopped. Seeing nothing important in the information, Daniel dismisses it and resolves to stop looking at such information. Daniel bends to pick up the dropped mana crystal, looking around warily before heading deeper into the dungeon. He'd used nearly a third of his mana already, and he had just started. For the first time, he begins to truly understand Mary's point. A half-dozen kobolds later, and a chance meeting with one other adventurer, Daniel has found the staircase down. The other battles since the first one have gone quite well, with little additional damage dealt to him, and bolstered his flagging confidence. As long as he paid attention, with his skill and level, he should be able to deal with a single kobold. Unlike most newbie adventurers, this wasn't his first class, and as such, his health was significantly higher than theirs. Of course, he had paid a price in time. Most adventurers who survived to his age were much higher level than him, and would not even consider stepping into a beginner dungeon. Confident and impatient, Daniel makes a decision and takes the steps down, ignoring the guard's advice. Chapter 9. The staircase down to the second floor leads to a small 10-foot-wide oval cavern that is currently empty. Unlike the first floor, the soft drip of water can be heard through the dungeon, stalagmites and stalactites dotting the floor and ceiling and just beginning to form. Lighting on the second floor is worse too, with the mana-imbued walls occasionally pitch black. Daniel feels the hair on his arms stand out a little more. The second floor actually felt dangerous compared to the first. The exit from this cavern is smaller too, more cramped, and Daniel realizes he'll have to shorten some of his strikes. For a moment, he considers going back upstairs before he spots the portal stone and recalls the directions given. He walks over swiftly and places his hand on the stone where it gently lights up, remembering his mana. The temporary distraction is enough to push the creeping doubts away. "Let's see what I can find down here," whispers Daniel to himself, filling the oppressive silence. It only takes a few minutes of walking for Daniel to run into his first kobold, a far cry from the relatively quiet first floor. The fight does not take much more time than his fights on the first floor, though the kobold is more skilled and is able to leave a long cut across his left arm. Daniel ignores the damage, only spending enough time to wrap a simple cloth bandage around his arm to stem the blood flow. Emboldened by the successful fight, he journeys deeper into the dungeon, stopping only occasionally to check his surroundings and his minimap to ascertain his location. Another fight with a kobold brings him a third of the way to his next level. Obviously, actual adventuring and fighting were a faster form of leveling than training. It has been hours since the start of the day, and the intense concentration required is wearing on him. The mental fatigue is something different from mining, and once again his wandering mind betrays him as he doesn't notice the kobold that creeps up behind him. His first impression of it is a sharp one, the shiv plunging into his back and nicking a kidney. A hasty back kick glances off the kobold's body, Daniel's larger size managing to push the monster away long enough for Daniel to spin around. Daniel snarls, stepping forward and swinging his mace to injure the kobold, who ducks into a smaller passageway that it came from to dodge the strike. The side passage is much smaller, barely 5 feet in height, with almost no lighting. Daniel crouches to follow the shorter kobold in to extract his revenge, forced to shorten his swings and to jab the mace forward in strikes. He doesn't have much room to attack properly, but the kobold is still forced to back away from the stronger human or risk getting injured. Both parties trade insignificant blows for a few seconds, before another sharp pain in his buttocks makes Daniel realize that he's surrounded. Trapped. For a moment, Daniel panics as the tight quarters, monsters in front and behind him, and open wounds make his chest tighten and his vision narrow. He freezes, body locked in fear as he realizes he might truly die here, his momentary pause allowing the kobold he faces to lunge forward and stab his arm. Instinctively, Daniel grabs the smaller kobold's arm and holds the monster to him, picking the creature up and rushing forward to escape the confines of the passageway. Almost trampling the monster as he shoves the creature ahead of him, his panicked body attempts to create space away from his pursuing attacker and fails, the shiv from his attacker behind him plunging again into his back and eliciting another grunt of pain. The kobold he holds tight, scratches and bites at the arm holding it, but is unable to do significant damage without the use of its weapon. Daniel continues rushing ahead, crouched over, and finally the pathway breaks open into a larger room. Still gripping the kobold, Daniel spins around and flings the smaller monster into its brethren's path before he falls back away from the two monsters, blood from his back continuing to pour out with every exertion. In the larger room, Daniel's moment of panic begins to subside, the two monsters pulling themselves apart and beginning to flank the novice adventurer. Realizing he cannot let them set themselves for an attack, Daniel rushes forward and activates his double strike proficiency, attacking the closest kobold of the two. A pair of strikes lash out, one dodged, but the second landing properly. It forces his attackers to grow warier as Daniel begins to swing his weapon with abandon, able to properly wind up in the larger space. Every time he is able to, he activates his skill proficiency, the mace suddenly moving faster. It takes only a few more passes before the fight finishes, a lucky blow to the top of one attacker's skull, stunning it long enough for a second attack to finish it. Faced one-on-one by Daniel, the second attacker falls with relative ease, and the injured Daniel slumps to the ground in pain. Out of battle, he feels the additional wounds on his arm and torso he received during the last few moments of desperate fighting. Grunting in pain, Daniel focuses on calling forth his gift and begins to stitch the wounds in his body together, cutting off the bleeding immediately. Once that important task is done, he proceeds to heal up the last of the damage with his mana, casting minor heal on himself and watching the last of the wounds stitch close. "Well, that didn't go well," Daniel whispers to himself, before finally pulling himself to his feet. He looks around before sliding one of the kobold shanks into his belt, finally recalling Mary's initial advice on having a shorter-reach weapon on hand. It definitely would have been helpful in the smaller passageway he had been trapped in. Thank Erlist he had more vitality and experience than a typical novice adventurer. With a last stretch and a quick looting of the mana stones, Daniel stares at his mini-map and ponders if he should head back upstairs or continue searching the second floor.